There are people who are losing food that they have in the fridge because there's not energy. The country. There are people who are protesting in the streets just because of that, and they want freedom also. And the government, what it's doing is putting them in jail. They are threatening their families. They are threatening their lives.
Outstanding is a production of The Washington Stand, Family Research Council's outlet for news and commentary from a biblical worldview.
Welcome to the Outstanding Podcast. I'm your host, Casey Harper. On this show, we dive into issues in the news, culture, politics, and more from a biblical perspective. Today, we're talking about Cuba. The country's on the verge of collapse, seems like it has been for a while, and President Donald Trump has tossed around the idea of military action. But the church in Cuba may have the solution. Joining me to discuss is Joey Suarez, the Washington Stand's International Affairs correspondent. Thanks for joining me.
Thank you for having me, Casey.
Yeah, you're actually a refugee from Cuba because of your journalism, right? Can you explain that?
Yes, I am. We suffered a lot, me and my family in the island. And now there are a lot of other independent journalists suffering also persecution in the island.
Now, when you say persecution, I think it would be helpful just for people to hear a little bit of your story. Before we dive in, I want to talk about the energy grid collapsing. I want to talk about the political implications for the U.S., bring in Venezuela. But you're an authority on this personally because you know firsthand what it was like to live under this kind of regime.
When I say persecution, it implies the tensions. We've lived that in Cuba. Also summons and threats of death and imprisonment, and in some cases, judicial action against you and those who are nearby you. I was suffering all those things, but today there are other people that are suffering that. And there are a lot of independent communicators that are Christians in the island, like Anna Bensi. She is a young girl. She had a lot of followers in social media, and she has been spoken through the repression, what is happening in the island. She has been talking about the lack of association, freedom of association, assembly freedom. She has been talking about the lack of freedom of expression in the island. And recently, this week, for instance, she and her mom had a judicial process reopened by the regime in order to put them both in jail. And they are suffering a lot. Also, the psychological torture of having people surrounding, political police officers surrounding your house, surveilling you, any place that you go. So the regime is putting a lot of pressure over these independent communicators because they want to control the narrative. They want the monopoly of the narrative. And they know, if the international community knows what is happening in the island, the torture against political prisoners, for instance, the persecution of the church, they detaining pastors, they detaining kids just because they are expressing their opinion in the public sphere. They know that put a lot of pressure over the regime and more sanctions, possibly. And it obviously gives the reason to the administration, especially Marco Rubio, who has been telling all these things about the regime that are truth, how evil it is. So the government, the Cuban government, is very worried about what these independent communicators, as in my moment in Cuba, they did. Now they are very worried about what they are selling, what they are telling, what they are saying outside of the country.
Now, we were seeing in the headlines that Cuba's energy grid is collapsing. There's having these big blackouts. That's not entirely new, but given the oil and the embargo and the energy crisis there, the U.S. is playing a role in that. Can you explain to us, how it seems like a big deal as an American when you read that there's just massive blackouts and the energy grid is collapsing? How significant is this for Cuba, and what role does it play in the larger story of what's going on right now?
I can tell you it's very difficult to live there. Not now because of the Trump embargo, certainly over oil, but since 6 decades, the last 6 decades, it's not Trump's fault that Cuba is a failed state. It's not Trump's fault that the Cuban government persecuted those who are fishing or those who are growing things in Cuba just to feed themselves. It's not Trump's fault that the Cuban government persecutes those who are more or less successful in the business sphere. It's not Trump's fault that the Cuban government is persecuting private property. So what I'm trying to say is that the situation is very bad now, but it's part of the Cuban propaganda to make it seems like it's there is an outside external force that is making the government to be an inefficient machine. The situation in the terrain is very difficult. There are people who are losing food that they have in the fridge because there's not energy in the country. There are people who are protesting in the streets just because of that, and they want freedom also. And the government, what is doing is putting them in jail. They are threatening their families. They are threatening their lives. Just to put you in perspective, Casey, the last week we had 2 nights in a row of protests in Havana, very close to the place that was the original residence of Fidel Castro. It's named Punto Cero, Point Zero. It would be an accurate translation, Punto Cero. And Punto Cero was a very sacred place, let's say, for the regime. And there are people protesting just half a mile from there, because the situation is unlivable, invivible, we would say in Spanish. I don't know if that's an accurate translation, unlivable in the island now. And the thing is that if you get sick, you don't have medicines in the places where medicines should be. If you need a treatment and you go to the hospital and you don't have any any of the things that you needles or any other of the things that you need for you to get better. So in so many cases, I've been hearing these stories of people who lives here in the U.S. and they send to Cuba every single thing that you will need to get to a surgery, for instance. It is just a failed state, and I hope the Trump administration can do certainly something to change what is happening there.
Yeah, I mean, so some of this is not new, and its situation is pretty dire, but it's even worse now on the energy front, right? Because the Trump administration has cut off the oil from Venezuela, is my understanding. A lot of oil from Venezuela was flowing to Cuba to kind of keep it on life support. What is the goal there? Some kind of regime change, I guess, but it's not working yet. We seem to sort of have this trend of trying to pressure regimes that don't care about the people. And so it's a little hard to put pressure on them when they don't actually care about their own people. Go ahead.
Yes, it's very difficult for the administration because the momentum that they had with Venezuela, with them taking Nicolás Maduro out of Venezuela, right, and putting him here in a federal prison where he should be. And that's good. That momentum, I think it is, they don't have the momentum now, especially because of the Iran situation. The Iran situation had took more weeks than we thought. And now the earthquake, those terrible earthquakes in Venezuela are taking a lot of the attention from the Trump administration. And I think is understandable. But the thing is that the Cuban government had this ability to gain time, to gain traction. Meanwhile, other people think they are giving you some concession. What I'm trying to say is they are very good political dancers. So the Trump administration, especially Marco Rubio, that he understands the regime, he has to, I hope that he doesn't fall in a trap that the regime is putting in front of him. What I'm saying is the regime is trying to rebrand themselves as if they are willing to do long-term concession in order to apply a free market policy in Cuba, let's say. That's a lie. And we saw that under the Obama administration, and Obama fell on that, and his advisors. They play as moderates, the Raúl Castro in that case, more than 10 years ago. And what we have now, what we had in that moment, is a strengthened regime. They gained strength, they gained oxygen, and they were able to put more pressure over human rights advocacy people. They put a lot of more pressure over independent journalists in Cuba. So I hope the Trump administration, especially Marco Rubio, he doesn't fall on these new traps that the regime is putting to play as they are moderates.
But what's your sense of how close the regime is actually to capitulating or maybe being overthrown? Those protests in Havana are pretty notable. I mean, in a country that cracks down on journalists the way that Iran does, or of a similar nature as Iran, to see protests like that in public are notable. Do you have the sense that there really is just any day now the whole regime could crumble, or are they pretty dug in?
I don't know for sure if the regime is going to fall down in a week or in a month. What I know is now with all the attention in Iran and Venezuela, because of the disaster there with the earthquakes, it's taking a lot of the air, a lot of the oxygen in the room. And I think the regime is very smart, and they are trying to make these big sensationalist moves in order to appear that they are more moderate, that they are willing to embrace free market politics or whatever. And I really hope, as I mentioned in the other answer, in my previous answer, that the Trump administration don't fall in that trap. The other thing is, people are protesting every night, almost every night in Havana, especially in Havana, in other parts of the country also. So the political narrative that the government had, that we are one, the people is one with the revolution, the people wants the revolution, that is cracking every day. The people are fed with a communist government. The people don't have food, they don't have medicine. And the pressure that the regime is putting over simple people. I'm not talking about an independent journalist or an intellectual. It's just common people, everyday people. It's enormous. So I think the regime needs to fall. Something that is going to be key for the regime to fall down is international support. I think the pressure from the Trump administration is good, and it shouldn't be stopped. More sanctions, that's good. And identifying people here in the U.S. that are connected with the regime and are feeding the regime with oxygen, with enterprises, with political lobbying. I think those people has to be identified and deported. Just the Trump administration have been doing that in the last month. We have seen people who were connected with a military structure there deported into Cuba. People who were connected in some capacity with military enterprises in Cuba. They have been deported, and I think that's the way to keep going, supporting Cuban people also diplomatically, internationally, as they have been doing, but also putting pressure all over the structure, the financial structure of the military in Cuba. That's key. That's important.
What about the church? What role does the church have to play in Cuba right now at this really a crossroads for the country?
Well, the church has been playing a very important role. And I'm going to talk about the church as an institution and the church as the gathering of Christians, right? Of the believers. For instance, these last 2 nights, the protests that have been happening nearby Point Zero, this place that was Fidel Castro's residency in Havana, have been led by Christians. They're leading their community into protesting the regime. There is a very important, very well known independent journalist in Havana is Junia Figueredo, and Junia is a Christian. Junia is a believer, and she has been convoking these protests in Havana, in this part of the capital. By the other hand, the church is also providing food and providing shelter to those who are in need in Cuba. The number of those grows every day, as you can imagine, and the church has been channeling food, help, aid from in the international ministries and even from the State Department here in the U.S., especially the Catholic Church. So I think they're acting in both ways. They're raising their voice, but at the same time, they are providing for those who are in need. So I think the church is a key player in this moment of Cuba and in the foreseeable future.
What about just like the humanitarian and missionary side of this, as far as Christians coming into Cuba? Are any Christians, probably difficult from America, but from even other countries, able to come in and help? I've always been fascinated by the idea, for instance, of Chinese missionaries to the Middle East in places where many American missionaries have trouble. Is there a similar parallel happening in Cuba?
There are Cuban missionaries connected with missionary agencies and abroad, and they have been preaching the gospel in several areas, especially in Africa. There are I personally.
Sorry, let me correct. I mean, what I'm asking is, are there missionaries going into Cuba to help with the humanitarian crisis? I have no doubt there's many Cuban Christians around the world.
There are Christian ministries, international Christian ministries, like, for instance, River Church in California, with the pastor Dante Gebel, that he is providing humanitarian aid to those who are in need in the island, and they have been building places to provide food. They have been spreading those donations that the government, these international ministries put in the island, and the good thing is that the government doesn't take part in that. So the donations are secure because the Cuban government has a very long history of taking those donations and selling it, or taking it for the military personnel. And the good thing is that the church is a reliable channel for providing these humanitarian aids to those who are in need in Cuba, and even in very difficult zones, like in the mountains, like in the countryside, places where there are no roads. There is a missionary, there is a pastor that could provide this humanitarian aid to those who are in need in their communities.
I also want to ask you about Venezuela. We've mentioned it a bit in their relationship to Cuba, but they've had these really their own natural disaster, the earthquakes there, huge casualties, and then the political instability because of the U.S. taking out their leader. You've been covering Venezuela as well. What's going on there? Why should American Christians care, and how can they be praying for the Venezuelans?
Well, I'm going to tell you that Samaritan Purse was one of the first international institutions that went there to Venezuela to assist those who have lost everything with those two terrible earthquakes that happened earlier this month. So what we have seen is a lot of need in La Guaira. La Guaira is a city nearby Caracas. Caracas is the capital. So, but by the other hand, we have seen a lot of obstacles put from for the government in Venezuela to those who are providing humanitarian aid, and for those who are trying to rescue people inside those buildings have fallen down with the earthquakes. We have two examples. There are certain areas of La Guaira where the regime doesn't allow people who are trying to rescue those who are in there to go. They don't allow them because there was a story that was broke by Agustin Laje. He's a very prominent political analyst in Latin America, that the government had money inside those buildings, and they are afraid that the rescuers can see that amount of money that they had, these officials in Venezuela, that they had in those buildings that now had also people inside, that they are dying day by day. So the Venezuelan government, because of their corruption, are putting a lot of obstacles to those who are trying to save lives. What I would say is now there is a big pressure from civil society to the Trump administration to say we are done with the government, with Delcy Rodriguez. Delcy Rodriguez is the president in charge of Venezuela, and she's part of the regime. She's part of the structure that put Maduro in the government. And the Trump administration has been working with her in order to get to a moment where there is a transition, a political transition in Venezuela. But people, because of the earthquakes, there is a political implication. People are just saying these Venezuelan, these Chavistas, they are evil. They are putting obstacles to those who are trying to save lives. Just take them down. We don't want them. So maybe these two earthquakes generates a political earthquake also. That is the Trump administration putting more pressure and speeding up that political transition that should have in Venezuela, that Venezuela should have in order to have free elections.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting, the timing of the earthquake and the political instability. I think you're right to point that out. It almost feels prophetic in some way that I don't understand fully. But what really stands out here is that these Marxist governments in Venezuela and Cuba are doing everything except helping the people that they're supposed to serve. And it's sad to see that in another country, of course, but it's even more troubling in many ways as an American to see the so many Democrats winning elections or running or talking about these very ideas which have totally ravaged and destroyed Venezuela and Cuba. I mean, we saw it, of course, with Zoran Mamdani in New York City. But now, this year, we're seeing more and more leaders pop up like this. When you see this as someone who fled this very thing, do you think that these leaders, many of them young, really know what they're asking for?
Well, I think the leaders, they know what they are asking for. They are asking to enrich themselves, which is what socialist dictators and socialist leaders have been done for a long time, Cuba and Venezuela included, as you mentioned. But I think that some people who are following them, they don't really know what is to live 3 days without electricity, what is to live without knowing if you're going to be able to vote in an election. I'm not saying that maybe it's going to happen here in the U.S. because you have a very strong subsidiarity system of subsidiarity. So maybe if there is, if Zoran Mamdani is in the path of transforming New York City in a hellhole, maybe the state could be saved. And other cities maybe could be saved. But what I'm trying to say is that socialism haven't worked for the people. It have worked for those who are in charge of the socialist system, definitely, but it doesn't work for the common people. And I think that that you have a parallel there, a prophetic parallel these last days, because in Cuba the national electrical system fell. And there was a big blackout in the whole island, the entire island. And that same day in New York, there were about 14,000 people that were without power, without electricity. So you can start seeing these preoccupying parallels between those policies in Cuba and also in places like New York. I really hope Americans really understand what socialism means in the the practicalities of that system, and don't fall for that lie.
All right. Well, thank you, Yoav. I really appreciate your expertise on this topic and really the personal experience you have for it. And man, this is clearly something that we need to be praying for. The church is not insignificant. It's very large in these countries. And so we have a lot of brothers and sisters who are suffering, but who also play a pivotal role in what could be the transformation of these countries. Thanks so much for your expertise and insight. Really appreciate it. And thank you to our listeners and viewers for tuning in. As always, please like, share, and subscribe. Get the message out there so we can get the word out to more people about the Outstanding podcast. Thanks for joining.
This podcast is made in the USA by producer Casey Harper, production assistant Rachel Woods, technical producers David Salkeld and Yusuf Fletcher, and executive producer Jared Bridges. Help us make more content by texting the word outstanding to 67742 and read more at washingtonstand.com. We'll see you next time.